Janet Jackson once signed an $80 million contract and lost it all in 9/16ths of a second. 15 years before that happened to her, we signed the lease on our first office. 31 pages, and we read every single one of them twice. We negotiated the rent down by $200 a month and walked out of that meeting feeling like the smartest tenants in the building. The one thing we never asked about was the parking lot next door, because it did not belong to our landlord. 8 months later, the man who did own it put up a chain-link fence. The fence cost him about $900. Our customers suddenly had nowhere to park, and by winter the office we were so proud of was worth half of what we were paying for it. We owned the space. We never owned the way in. Virgin Records learned the same lesson with Janet Jackson, except their version cost $80 million and collapsed in front of 140 million people in 9/16ths of a second. To understand what was destroyed, we have to start with what was bought. In January of 1996, Janet Jackson signed the largest recording contract in music history, $80 million for 4 albums, bigger than her brother Michael Jackson's $60 million deal with Sony, bigger than anything Madonna had signed at Warner. United Press International reported the terms on January 12th, and the rest of the industry needed a moment to absorb them. The structure tells you exactly how much Virgin believed. According to Time magazine's reporting that year, the package included a $35 million signing bonus, $5 million per album, and another $25 million in advances for videos and promotion. Her lawyer was Don Passman, the entertainment attorney who wrote the standard textbook on the music business, and secondary reports put her royalty rate around 24% of retail. Nobody had ever attached numbers like that to a recording artist, and almost nobody else wanted to. Disney looked at the deal and walked away. So did Sony, Polygram, Bertelsmann, Time Warner, and DreamWorks. 6 of the most powerful media companies on Earth ran the math and quietly left the table. One executive told Time that anyone paying an artist $80 million would want to know they could sell roughly 40 million units across 5 albums just to feel safe. 40 million units was more than many superstars moved in an entire career. This was also the second time Virgin had broken the bank for her. Back in 1991, Richard Branson personally courted her away from A&M Records with a contract reported between $32 and $40 million, which briefly made her the highest-paid musician alive, until Michael Jackson signed his Sony deal a few days later. The siblings spent the early 90s taking turns breaking each other's salary records, which must have made the family dinners interesting. Buried in the 1996 paperwork sat one more detail, and almost nobody talks about it, then or now. United Press International reported that ownership of the new master recordings would revert to Janet 7 years after the contract ended. Keep that clause in mind. 2 decades before Taylor Swift turned master ownership into a global movement, Janet Jackson's lawyers were already writing it into the biggest deal ever signed. We will come back to it. For 8 years, the terrifying math actually worked. The album she titled simply Janet, released in 1993 under the first Virgin deal, sold around 14 million copies worldwide. The sound on that record and everything before it had been built largely by producers Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, the Minneapolis-based duo whose partnership with Janet stretched back to Control in 1986, and whose influence on the catalog's commercial dominance is impossible to separate from the contract numbers. The Velvet Rope followed in 1997 as the first album under the $80 million contract and moved more than 7 million copies globally. Then came April of 2001, when All For You opened with 605,000 copies in its first week in the United States, one of the biggest opening weeks any female artist had ever posted. It debuted at number 1, and the title track sat on top of the Hot 100 for 7 straight weeks. Step back and look at what Virgin was actually holding. 5 consecutive studio albums at number 1, stretching from Control in 1986 to All For You in 2001. Rhythm Nation, 1814, a record that helped define the new jack swing era and remains, to this day, the only album in history to land 7 singles in the top 5 of the Hot 100. 10 number 1 singles overall. The catalog was not just performing, it was compounding, the way a great asset is supposed to. But every dollar of that performance flowed through one set of pipes. Radio promotion ran through giants like Infinity Broadcasting and Clear Channel. Video promotion ran through MTV and VH1. And Infinity, MTV, and VH1 all belong to the same parent company, Viacom, controlled by Sumner Redstone, with the CBS television network sitting inside the very same corporate family. Virgin owned the catalog, Viacom owned the way in. On February 1st, 2004, Janet Jackson headlined the Super Bowl 38th halftime show in Houston. The show was produced by MTV. It aired on CBS. The same parent company stood on both ends of the camera. In the final seconds of the performance, Justin Timberlake reached across her chest, tore away a piece of the costume, and exposed her right breast on live television for 9/16ths of a second. The Federal Communications Commission eventually logged more than 542,000 complaints. Measured against the length of the exposure, that works out to nearly 1 million complaints for every full second of footage, which may stand as the most efficient outrage in the history of American television. The event acquired its own shorthand almost immediately, with the press labeling it Nipplegate, a term that stuck so thoroughly it now carries its own entry in media and cultural reference databases. What happened next is where the gossip story ends and the money story begins. In 2018, an investigation by HuffPost reporter Yashar Ali, citing multiple CBS insiders, alleged that CBS chief executive Les Moonves became obsessed with ending Janet Jackson's career. According to that reporting, Moonves ordered MTV, VH1, and Viacom's radio stations to stop playing her songs and her videos. Clear Channel stations, roughly 1,200 of them, pulled back as well, though the company has denied that any coordinated blacklist ever existed. The reported reason for Moonves' fury was almost absurdly small. Both performers apologized publicly, but Timberlake also apologized to Moonves personally, reportedly in tears, inside his office. Janet did not. The difference in outcomes arrived within 7 days. The Grammy Awards aired on CBS 1 week after the Super Bowl. Timberlake was allowed to attend, allowed to perform, and walked out with 2 trophies. Janet's invitation was rescinded. She watched an awards show broadcast on the network that was, according to that reporting, actively dismantling her business at the same time. One more detail from those days lands harder the longer it sits. In her own documentary years later, Janet revealed what she told Timberlake when the storm broke. She told him she wanted no drama for him, because they were aiming all of it at her. She protected him. He then went on television and coined the phrase wardrobe malfunction, putting a name on the event that she would spend the next decade paying for. Now we can put real numbers on the destruction, because her next album arrived just 7 weeks after the Super Bowl. Damita Jo, released in March of 2004, opened with 381,000 copies. Her previous album had opened with 605,000. That is a 37% collapse in opening week sales for the same artist at the same label, 3 years apart. The album stalled at number 2 behind Usher, breaking her streak of 5 straight number 1 debuts, and it became her first studio album to miss the top of the chart since Dream Street in 1984, back when she was 17 years old. The singles tell the cleaner story. Damita Jo produced 0 top 40 hits on the Hot 100. Not a single one. For the first time in roughly 20 years, a Janet Jackson album could not place one song in the top 40. Billboard later wrote that the album was overshadowed by the Super Bowl fallout and that its singles were blacklisted by pop radio. An industry source quoted in the Charlotte Observer described Viacom absolutely bailing on the record and said the singles I Want You and All Night would have been out-of-the-park hits at any other point in her career. The damage kept spreading past music. A BC had announced Janet as the star and executive producer of a Lena Horne biopic, a project she had chased for years. After the Super Bowl, Horne's family demanded her removal. Janet exited. The producers quit in protest. The film was never made. Her follow-up album in 2006 opened lower still, at 296,000 copies. By 2007, she was gone from Virgin entirely, and the $80 million partnership ended not with a renewal, but with a quiet exit. One album on Island Def Jam came after, and then she went independent. Before we count the final bill, stop for a moment and run this story against your own balance sheet. Whatever you own that earns money, a rental property, a brokerage account, a small business, a channel like this one, somewhere there is a road your customers travel to reach it, and somebody else probably owns that road. Ours was a parking lot and $900 of chain link. Virgin Records wired $80 million for a catalog and never asked what would happen if the man who controlled the road decided he was personally offended. That question turned out to be the entire deal. So who actually paid for all of this? Start with the regulator. In September of 2004, the FCC fined CBS $550,000, the legal maximum of $27,500 for each of 20 stations the network owned. It was the largest fine ever issued against a television broadcaster at the time, and it amounted to less than 1% of what Virgin had paid Janet. Then the lawyers went to work. CBS paid the fine in 2006 purely to unlock its appeal, and in July of 2008, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals threw the penalty out, ruling that the FCC had punished a fleeting image under a policy that had only ever covered fleeting words. The Supreme Court sent the case back down in 2009. The Third Circuit voided the fine again in 2011. And in June of 2012, the Supreme Court declined to hear the matter, ending it forever. After 8 years in federal court, the network's final total legal liability for the broadcast came to $0. CBS even got its $550,000 back. The only party in this story that ultimately paid nothing was the one that produced the show, aired the show, and then, according to the reporting, buried the artist. Meanwhile, the half-second itself was quietly minting fortunes for everyone standing nearby. TiVo announced it was the most replayed moment in the company's history, and Forbes reported the clip pulled in an estimated 35,000 new TiVo subscribers, people who bought a piece of hardware specifically so they could rewind it. A young engineer named Jawed Karim grew frustrated that he could not find the clip anywhere online, and he has said that frustration helped inspire a website he co-founded the following year called YouTube, which Google later bought for $1.65 billion. The federal indecency crackdown that followed pushed Howard Stern off broadcast radio and into satellite, and Sirius grew from roughly 700,000 subscribers to 6 million within 2 years of announcing him. The NFL tore up its own playbook too. A 5-second broadcast delay went in the following year, and for the next 6 Super Bowls, the league booked only legacy acts: Paul McCartney, the Rolling Stones, Prince, Tom Petty, Bruce Springsteen, and The Who. An entire era of halftime programming redesigned around 1/2 second. Billions of dollars in value, all of it created by that same half second of television, and none of it flowing to the woman on the stage or to the label that had paid for her voice. Which brings us to the final ledger, and it takes 20 years to balance. Les Moonves ran CBS until September of 2018, when he resigned amid sexual misconduct allegations reported by The New Yorker, the same year the HuffPost investigation detailed his alleged campaign against Janet. In December, the CBS board terminated him for cause and withheld his entire severance package of $120 million. He fought the decision in arbitration until 2021, then dropped the claim. To be precise about where that money went, it stayed with the corporation. Janet never received a cent of it. The system clawed back $120 million from the man, 14 years too late, and for entirely different offenses. Justin Timberlake's account settled more slowly. In 2021, after a documentary about Britney Spears reopened the whole era, he posted a public apology naming Janet directly and admitting he had benefited from a system that condones misogyny and racism. In March of 2024, his new album opened with 67,000 copies, the lowest first week of his entire solo career, against 293,000 for the record before it. 3 months later, he was arrested for drunk driving in Sag Harbor, told the officer he had consumed 1 martini, and eventually pleaded down to a lesser violation. The fine was $500. Her penalty for his half-second was a career. His penalty for driving impaired was $500 and some community service. In fairness, his concert tour still grossed over $200 million, so the collapse hit his records and his reputation while the roadshow kept selling. And Janet, across 2023 and 2024, she mounted the Together Again tour. 88 shows, more than 1 million tickets sold, $106 million in gross revenue. The biggest tour of her entire career arrived 2 full decades after the industry declared her finished, and it made her one of only 6 black women in history to cross $100 million on a single tour. A Las Vegas residency followed, and current estimates put her net worth around $180 million. For scale, consider what catalogs like hers trade for in today's market. Sony paid more than $600 million for half of Michael Jackson's estate assets. Bruce Springsteen sold his for roughly $500 million. Bob Dylan for more than $300 million. Nobody can say what a Janet Jackson catalog with an unbroken run would have commanded, because the run was broken for her. Remember the clause we asked you to keep in mind, the one returning her masters 7 years after the contract ended. This is where the paper trail goes quiet, and we are going to be straight about that. In 2012, Universal Music Group acquired the recorded music business of EMI Group, the parent company that had absorbed Virgin Records, in a deal worth $1.9 billion. That acquisition put the EMI and Virgin catalogs inside the UMG umbrella, and the streaming credits on Janet's Virgin-era albums list UMG recordings today. How that squares with the reversion clause reported back in 1996 has never been publicly explained, and no court filing we could find settles it. What is documented is that every album she has released since 2015 came out through her own label, Rhythm Nation Records, with the masters in her own hands, and that in March of 2026, she signed a worldwide publishing administration deal covering her full catalog. An administration deal, not a sale. The woman who lost control of the way in has spent 20 years buying back every piece of the road she could reach. We eventually moved out of that first office, and on the last day we drove past the chain link fence that had beaten us. $900 of galvanized steel taught us more about ownership than 31 pages of lease ever did. Virgin Records signed its own stack of pages in 1996, $80 million of belief in one artist, and never priced the fence. The fence around Janet Jackson stood for almost 20 years, and the courts eventually ruled that building it had cost the network nothing at all. She is the only person in this story who ever paid full price. She is also the only one who finally tore her fence down.